The gravel lot outside the Red Creek Grange Hall was full by 8 in the morning. Trucks parked crooked in the September dew, and half the county stood around folding tables loaded with jars of honey and baskets of tomatoes. It was harvest day, the kind of small gathering Red Creek had held every fall for as long as anyone could remember. A few of them were looking east, past the tree line, toward 80 acres that used to be a joke. Ray Mercer stood with his coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the fence line that ran straight and tight along the road. A year ago, that fence had been on the ground in 3 places, buried under blackberry canes. Now it held, post after post, all the way to the creek. "I'll be damned," he said, mostly to himself. Behind him, a farm stand had gone up under a pop-up canopy. Eggs, squash, dried herbs, a hand-lettered sign that read, "Bennett Farm." A line had formed. Ray hadn't expected a line. 12 months earlier, nobody in Red Creek would have bet $1 that the old Whitfield place would ever hold a fence again, let alone a line of customers. 12 months earlier, it had just been Claire Bennett standing alone in a flooded field, wondering if she'd made the worst decision of her life. To understand how the farm got here, you have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, almost exactly a year before. Claire Bennett was 42 years old, and for 17 years she had run the front office of a dental practice in a strip mall off Route 33. Scheduling, insurance claims, payroll, patient complaints, the whole quiet machinery that kept a small business from falling apart. She was good at it. She was tired of it. 2 years earlier, her marriage had ended, not with anything dramatic, just a slow drifting apart that left her with a modest condo, a car payment, and a 16-year-old daughter named Emily, who split her weekends between 2 houses that no longer felt like one family. Claire had $47,000 in savings. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't much either, and every dollar of it represented the difference between stability and disaster. She did the math on her rent increase that spring, up almost 20%, and the math on Emily's school fees, and the math on what a dental office salary in central Ohio would look like in another 10 years. And none of it added up to a future she wanted. She started looking at land almost by accident, scrolling one night after Emily had gone to bed, typing "cheap acreage, Missouri" into a search bar because a coworker's brother had moved to the Ozarks and seemed happy about it. She wasn't seriously looking. She told herself that for weeks. Then she found the listing for an 80-acre property outside a town called Red Creek, Missouri, listed at $58,000, a fraction of what land that size should cost. The photos were bad, taken with a phone in poor light. A farmhouse with peeling paint, a barn leaning visibly to one side, fields the color of straw and choked with weeds. The listing had been up for over 300 days. Claire flew down on a Thursday and drove the last 25 minutes from the airport on a 2-lane road that narrowed into gravel. The property sat behind a rusted gate, and when she stepped out of the rental car, the first thing she noticed was the silence. No traffic, no neighbors close enough to hear, just wind moving through grass that came up past her knees. The farmhouse was worse in person, and somehow better, too. The porch sagged on one end, a window on the second floor had been patched with plywood. But the roof was intact, the foundation was solid, and when she pushed open the front door, the rooms inside were dusty and empty, not ruined. The barn was another story. One wall had partially collapsed, and pigeons had taken over what was left of the loft. Old equipment sat rusting in the weeds behind it, a flatbed trailer with 2 flat tires, an ancient disc harrow half swallowed by blackberries. The real estate agent, a heavyset man named Dale who clearly wanted to be done showing this particular property, explained why it had sat unsold for so long. The previous owner, a man named Whitfield, had died 11 years earlier. His 3 children lived in Texas, Arizona, and Oregon, and none of them wanted to move back or manage a farm from a distance. Taxes had piled up. The place had been rented briefly to a family who let the fields go to seed and then left. After that, nobody local wanted the work, and nobody from outside the area wanted the risk. "Most folks take one look and get back in their car," Dale said. Claire walked the fence line anyway, out past the barn, down toward a shallow creek that cut along the eastern edge of the property, through a stand of oak and hickory that made up maybe 20 acres of untouched woods. Standing there, she found herself doing something she hadn't expected, picturing what it could look like fixed. Not perfect, just working. She flew home and didn't sleep for 3 nights. The number that finally moved her wasn't the price of the land, it was the price of staying. Her rent alone over the next 5 years would come close to what this farm cost outright. She ran the numbers a dozen different ways, and every version ended the same place. She could keep bleeding money slowly in Columbus, or she could take a real risk once on something that was hers. She asked herself, more than once, sitting alone in her kitchen with a legal pad full of numbers, what if this is the biggest mistake I've ever made? Emily's reaction, when Claire finally told her, was quieter than she expected. Not anger, something closer to disbelief. You want to move to a farm in Missouri. Emily was 16, with a group of friends she'd known since middle school, a phone that never left her hand, and a life built entirely around a city Claire was now proposing to leave. She didn't yell, she just went quiet for a few days, which was somehow worse. Claire closed on the property in early October. She financed part of it through a small rural lender who specialized in agricultural properties, put down a significant chunk of her savings, and signed papers in a title office that smelled like burnt coffee. Nobody clapped, nobody handed her a champagne glass. She walked out to the parking lot afterward and sat in her car for a long moment before she could make herself turn the key. She had bought the farm. She had not solved anything yet. The first month told her that immediately. The well pump failed in the second week, and getting a new one installed cost more than she'd budgeted, draining nearly $3,000 she'd hoped to spend elsewhere. The septic system needed inspection and partial repair. Sections of the barn roof leaked badly enough that she roped off the interior rather than risk anyone underneath it. The perimeter fence, in places, existed only as fallen wire tangled in brush, which meant nothing was keeping deer out of what would eventually need to be a garden. She learned to drive to the hardware store in town so often that the owner, a woman named Susan Hale, started keeping a running tally of what Claire had bought that week before she even reached the counter. Susan's store sat on Main Street between a diner and a feed supply, and it became, without either of them planning it, a kind of home base. A place where Claire picked up fence staples and asked questions she was embarrassed to ask anyone else. Red Creek noticed her before she noticed it noticing. Ray Mercer, a retired farmer who'd worked land 2 miles down the same road for 40 years, drove past the Whitfield place enough times that fall to form an opinion, and he wasn't shy about sharing it the first time Claire flagged him down to ask about fence posts. You know this place is going to cost you more than you think, he told her, leaning out his truck window. It wasn't unkind, it was just true, and he said it the way a man says something he said to a lot of people who didn't listen. Mark Ellis, the mechanic who ran the equipment shop outside town, got to know Claire over the ancient tractor she'd inherited with the property, a machine that spent more time in his shop than in her field that first winter. He charged her fair rates and explained things twice without making her feel foolish for asking. Not everyone was generous. She heard, secondhand, that a few people around town had a quiet bet going on how long she'd last. 6 months was the number that kept coming up. She never confirmed it, but she didn't need to. She could feel it in the way people looked at her truck when she pulled into the feed store, in the careful, polite skepticism of neighbors who'd seen outsiders try this before and fail. At home, the pressure showed up differently. Emily struggled with the internet, which cut out whenever it rained hard, with the 40-minute bus ride to a school where she knew no one, with chores that hadn't existed in her old life. Hauling water to the chickens Claire had impulsively bought in November, stacking firewood, helping patch fence in the cold. There were nights Claire heard her crying through the wall and didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like an apology she couldn't actually make. She began to wonder, quietly and painfully, whether she had traded her daughter's stable unhappiness for a harder one. But there were other nights too. The two of them on the porch with mugs of hot cider, watching the fields turn silver under a full moon, not talking about anything important. Small truces. Claire held on to those. Winter passed slower than she expected, expensive in ways she hadn't planned for. By March, her savings had dropped from $47,000 to under $19,000, and she had a farm that was still more liability than asset. She kept a notebook of every dollar spent and every dollar earned, and for months, the second column stayed nearly empty. Then, in the second week of April, a storm rolled through Red Creek that the local news called a 100-year event. It hit in the middle of the night. Wind that peeled a section of tin roofing off the barn and sent it cartwheeling across the field. Rain that turned the lower pasture into standing water within hours. Hail that dented the roof of Claire's truck and split 2 panels of the fence she'd spent November rebuilding. By morning, the creek had overflowed enough to flood the bottom 6 acres, and a section of the barn's already weak frame had partially given way. Claire stood in the mud afterward, soaked through, looking at the damage in gray morning light, and felt something close to defeat for the first time since she'd signed the papers. The repair estimate Mark Ellis gave her for the equipment alone made her sit down on the tailgate of her truck. She did the math that night at the kitchen table, and the number that came back scared her. She thought seriously, for the first time, about calling Dale and asking what the property might sell for now. Maybe everyone was right, she thought. Maybe I never should have done this. What changed her mind wasn't a single moment. It was a slow accumulation of small ones. It was Emily, unprompted, pulling on Boots the morning after the storm and helping her drag fallen branches out of the flooded field without being asked. It was Susan Hale, ringing up a cart of fencing supplies, saying simply, "Storm hit everybody around here. You're not the only one starting over this spring." It was Ray Mercer, who drove by 2 days later, got out of his truck without being invited, and looked at the barn frame for a long minute before saying, "That corner post is salvageable if you brace it right. I can show you how." That was the turning point, though it didn't feel dramatic at the time. Claire's deepest habit, refusing help because asking felt like admitting failure, finally cracked. She started asking questions instead of pretending she already knew the answers. She paid Ray for his time when he'd let her, worked alongside him when he wouldn't, learned from Mark how to keep the tractor running herself instead of hauling it into town every time. She read agricultural extension guides at the kitchen table after Emily went to bed, made mistakes anyway, planted a first stand of vegetables too early and lost half of it to a late frost, misjudged how many chickens a coop that size could actually handle, and kept going. The rebuilding through summer wasn't fast. Fence went up section by section, not all at once. The barn frame got braced and partially re-roofed rather than fully rebuilt, functional, not fancy. The garden, on its second attempt, actually produced tomatoes, squash, peppers, more than the 2 of them could eat, which is how the idea of a small farm stand started, almost as an afterthought, with a card table at the end of the driveway. Emily, without anyone pushing her, started helping run it. She built a simple sign, then a website nobody had asked her to make, then a following on social media that brought a handful of townspeople out to see the place for themselves. By August, Claire had a dozen hens laying reliably, a stretch of field finally cleared and planted, and a standing order with the diner in town for fresh eggs twice a week. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't even comfortable. But for the first time since she'd signed those papers, the numbers in her notebook started moving in both directions instead of just one. By September, when the harvest gathering rolled around at the Grange Hall, the fence Ray had once doubted held tight along the road. The barn stood upright with a patched roof, and a line of neighbors waited at a folding table to buy eggs and vegetables grown on 80 acres that everyone in town had once written off as a lost cause. Ray Mercer walked over to the stand that morning, looked at the crates of squash and the cartons of eggs, and said the same thing he'd say to any farmer he respected. "You did more with this place in a year than the Whitfields did in the last 20. From Ray, that was as close to a toast as anyone was going to get. Susan Hale bought a dozen eggs and told Claire, without much ceremony, that half the store's regulars had started asking when the Bennett farm stand would be open again. Someone who'd once called the Whitfield place a money pit stopped by just to look at the barn, shaking his head slightly, saying nothing at all, which said everything. That evening, after the crowd thinned and the folding tables came down, Claire walked out past the barn toward the tree line, the light going gold and long across a field that had been chest-high weeds a year earlier. Emily fell into step beside her, quiet, the way she'd gotten used to being on the land now, instead of resentful of it. "You still think this was a mistake?" Emily asked, not quite joking. Claire looked out at the fence, the garden rows, the barn standing crooked but standing, the creek catching the last of the light. No, she said, but I don't think it was ever supposed to be easy. I think it was supposed to be worth it. They stood there a while longer, mother and daughter, on 80 acres that had once been forgotten and were forgotten no more.